We are going to go ahead and get started. This is going to be a pseudocode example. So we are going to start and end. I always like to start or have in my pseudocode a message that tells what the program is going to do. We are going to have some input. And as I'm working my way through, I realize I'm going to also need some declarations. I am coding this as I'm talking through it, so it would be very similar to how you might be coding or working through your pseudocode. So some declarations I'm going to need would be a number, and that's going to be the number of inches from the user. And I'm also going to need a string that's going to represent the units that they want to convert to. I'm going to call that units choice. And we're going to have a result, which would be the result of that calculation. I might change that variable name later as I think through this. So I have my user-friendly output to display inches converter. Then I am going to ask the user to input the number of inches. And I am using our shortcut prompt for input now, where I place the prompt for the user inside the quotations. And I will say enter the number of inches. And so this is I'm inputting the prompt for the user, that's user friendly. I'm just saying it's an input method, and then I'm assigning it to the number of inches. Likewise, we are going to ask the user to input what choice they have, but we should maybe display some additional instructions. So what we're going to say is something like, we will convert the inches to yards, YD, well, actually, let me put feet, to feet. I'll put FT or yards. And then that's probably about as long as I want to make that line. You will enter FT or YD to indicate your choice. So we have provided some very detailed user-friendly prompts or outputs there. And now we're going to get the units choice from the user. So the units choice will be input from the user, and we will say enter FT or YD for your choice. And that's what they will enter. Now, based upon their choice, we're going to have to make a decision on what conversion to do. If I kind of stub out what that decision might look like, we would say something like if units choice double equals, and we would do FT, then we're going to have one branch of logic that we would do. Otherwise, we're going to follow another branch of logic. So inside each of these branches, we'll have some statements, and then we will have an end if. After the end if, we will display the results and a nice user-friendly end to the program. Now, when we display the results, it also would be nice to display the label or the appropriate units, which actually brings up the idea that I probably shouldn't use FT here because that's actually what we consider a magic number. What would be better is if I were to say, I'm going to use the feet label, which is FT. The other option that we have is the yards label then. And so what I am doing is creating constants. Constants are named with all capitals. And so the feet label will just say FT, and the yard label will say yard. and we're not going to worry about it being plural right now. It's going to be like 1.11 FT or 3.33 YD. And if we were actually programming this in a program, we could actually change that to uppercase or lowercase with some special commands. So this is the stub of our main program. We're not done writing the program. What we're going to have to do inside this if statement is call the appropriate method for doing the conversions. We are now ready to kind of talk through the methods, and there's more than one way I could do this. I could start within my decision here and say, well, the result is going to be what I get when I call the method, but I haven't named my method yet. This one's going to be converting to feet, so I would call it something like inches to feet, and I am going to have to send it the number of inches. And so what I am writing right now is my method call. This needs to be indented. The other thing that I would do is I'm going to set a label for my final output. And I'm going to then be able to use that variable to display feet or yards, the abbreviation, using my display method down here. I'm going to have to flush this out a little bit. But I need to write this method. And so my method is its own little unit or component. My method returns a value, so I need to say num because it's going to return a value there. It's called inches to feet, and it's going to take in a numeric variable, and it's represented the number of inches. I am using a different variable there for the parameter. So the number of inches from my main driver is going to be sent to this parameter inches. I'm going to then use that to do my conversions. I'm going to need a few more declarations here. And that is, I'm going to need a numeric declaration for the number of feet. And I might need, I also need a numeric declaration for my conversion factor. And so the number of inches per feet is what we're looking at is 12. And that's going to be assigned to a constant because we don't want any magic numbers. I then declare or have declared my variable feet, and now I'm going to assign the feet will be inches divided by the inches per feet. That's going to be my result. And then I have to return that value. So when I say return feet, whatever the value that is in feet will get returned to main. Now remember, all of these variables that are within this method here are local to that method. They will not exist in main. So as soon as this method gets done executing, all of those variables go out of scope. So the value gets returned to main. I capture it in this variable. That's very important to understand that a value gets returned from this method call. It gets stored in result. And then I'm going to use that to output the final expression. My final output might look something like this. In order to make it user-friendly, I might say something like the number or let's start with the number of inches that we started with. So it's, and here's what I'm thinking in my brain. Like I'm thinking that I'm going to say something like 40 inches converts to, and if I look back at my test data, it would be 3.33 feet. So this is what I want my output to look like, but I have to build that output. meaning I have to use a combination of variables plus strings. The 40 is going to be a variable because that's the number of inches that we started with, and that'll always change. Inches is going to be the same. Converts to will be quotes. So this blank inches converts to blank. And I'm saying blank because we have to plan for that space. We have to plan for that space in our output. And then I'm going to add on the result. And then I'm going to add a space. So I'm building out what my display is going to be. So I first typed it out, and now I'm going back and I'm going to have to put in variables. So instead of 40, it's going to be number of inches plus space. Inches converts to space. Instead of 33.33, it's going to be the result that I got back from my method. That's going to be this value that's stored in that variable, plus a space. I have to literally plan for that space, plus my label. And my label is either going to be feet or yards. So whether it's feet or yards, I don't have to have two different output statements. This entire statement then is going to be my result. So when I get done, it's going to take the value that's in number of inches. It's going to say inches converts to. It'll take the value that was in result. It'll add a space, and then it'll put on the appropriate label. Now we're going to wrap up this program. I have already coded the inches to yards method. It mimics the inches to feet, except with a different conversion factor, and I'm returning yards. Again, none of these variables that exist in this method will exist in main. So how do I call that method? I call a method using the name of the method, and then I have to send it the actual value or argument that it needs. What we are going to do is very similar to what we did for our feet. We just need to change inches to feet to inches to yards, and we need to change our label to yard label, and that will conclude our program. I'm going to make a few additional comments here. If you are good to go, you can stop listening if you would like. If I had some additional conversions, so let's say, for example, I did feet, yards, and miles, I would change this program up by saying or adding another question in this if statement. It would look something like the following. If units choice equals feet label, then I'd have to say else if units choice equals yard label, then I would do everything in that code, and then I would have the else to take care of the miles. The other thing you could do is you don't have to use an else. You can ask this single question all by itself. You could say if units choice is feet label, do this. If units choice is yard label, do this. Else if units choice, blah, blah, blah. The else just adds a layer of efficiency if you do use it. But if you don't want to, that is fine. You can have single if statements, which would be a single selection statement, and your code would still work. The other things I just want to mention are good programming practices. If you look at the indentation, it's very clear what structures go with what. And if you look at using of constants in order, it increases the efficiency of your program as well. Using descriptive variable names is useful. I'm not very happy with my name here of result, but I'm using it now because I'm a little tired and I want to be done. I think that's about it.